Our job here is to take really complex ideas and break them down into clear visual stories. And today, we're going to peel back the layers on a question that seems super simple on the surface, but, well, it uncovers this whole hidden world of power and influence.
So who really pays your bills? We're going to follow a thread that starts right there with your paycheck and leads us into these often totally unseen centers of global power. It's a system that, whether it's by design or just because it's so complex, manages to keep the real picture just out of sight. So you probably think it's your direct manager, right? I mean, that makes sense. They're the one who approves your timesheet or sets your targets for the quarter. That's the face of the company we all actually see.
And hey, if you run a small business, you're probably thinking, it's my customers, obviously, the people walking through the door. But here's the kicker. These are just the first links, the most obvious ones, in a much, much longer, and you could argue way more powerful, invisible chain.
Yeah, the real answer is hidden, and maybe hidden by design. So today, we're going to follow the money, we're going to go step by step and find out who really signs that paycheck. Okay, let's kick things off. Section 1. Who really pays you? We're going to start with a story that's probably pretty familiar, the one we all tell ourselves about our jobs, and yeah, our bosses. See, that boss you see in meetings every day, they're really just the face of a much, much deeper capital structure. It doesn't matter if you're at some giant corporation or a tiny local cafe. Your boss, that human being, always answers to someone else. And that, of course, brings us to our second section, meet your boss's boss. If you work for a company that's on the stock market, the next link up the chain, well, it's not even a person, it's the shareholders. But who are these shareholders, really? It's so easy to picture thousands of regular folks, people like you and me, investing their money, but honestly, that's not the reality at all. The huge, overwhelming majority of shares are held by just a handful of massive, incredibly powerful institutions. All right, let's dive into this. Section 3, the giants of capital. And seriously, you might want to brace yourself, because the scale of what we're about to talk about it's just genuinely mind-bending. $13.5 trillion. Now, that's not a typo. That is the amount of money managed by just one firm, BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the world. And who's right behind them? Vanguard. They're managing over $11.6 trillion. Now, to give you some perspective on that, the entire GDP of the United States is around $23 trillion. So these two firms, just these two, are managing an amount of money that's in the same ballpark as the entire economy of the world's biggest superpower. Okay, now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This table shows you the top 5 asset managers. But check this out. If we expand this to the top 10, they collectively control something like $60 trillion. 60 trillion. For all intents and purposes, that makes them the de facto owners of the entire global market. Okay, so what if you work for a private company? Well, the chain gets even murkier, even harder to trace. It usually leads to these private equity giants, names like Blackstone, KKR, and the Carlyle Group. Or it might just vanish into some super secretive family office, or maybe even a sovereign wealth fund owned by another country. So now we kind of know who's holding all the money, but here's where it gets really interesting. This is the crucial twist we're going to get into in Section 4, ownership versus control. Because even though these massive firms own the shares, it doesn't really mean what you probably think it means. And this introduces a really critical idea, the stewards of capital. A lot of these incredibly powerful people, we're talking the CEOs of these firms, the trustees of giant pension funds, they don't actually own the money they control. Legally, it belongs to millions of other people just like us. This slide just lays out the central puzzle of this whole system perfectly. On one side, you've got the people with the control, the asset managers, the executives. They're the ones voting the shares, making the huge decisions. And then on the other side, you've got the people who get the enjoyment, right? That's the millions of us with our 401ks and pensions. The very people who benefit from the wealth have almost zero say in how it's actually managed. So let's move on to Section 5 and see how this whole system stays so hidden, because this is no accident. What we're looking at is a system of secrets. It is designed to be invisible.
The source material actually points to 4 key layers that create this invisibility. So first, you've got these murky legal structures, things like offshore trusts and holding companies that just bury the real ownership under a mountain of paperwork. Second, power is just constantly passed down from one group to the next, which diffuses accountability at every single step. Third, let's be honest, the average worker has pretty much no practical way to influence what's being done with their own retirement money. And finally, you have this powerful illusion of independence, especially for small business owners who, at the end of the day, are still connected to the very same pools of capital.
So when you step back and look at the sheer scale of what we can't see, 60 trillion controlled by just the top 10 asset managers, over 145 trillion in global banking assets, you start to realize something. The person, or the thing that really pays your bills, isn't a person at all. It's the accumulated capital of the world's richest people and institutions, and it's all filtered through this incredibly complex and, intentionally invisible system.
And that brings us to this really powerful quote from the source. We will continue to mistake the visible for the real and the local for the ultimate. And what that means is, as long as we don't really grasp this invisible chain, we're going to keep focusing all our energy and attention on the manager in the next office over, instead of the huge global forces that are really shaping our jobs and our lives.
So we'll leave you with one last question. Now that you can see the chain, now that you can trace it from your paycheck all the way to the very top, who do you think is really pulling it? Is it the stewards who have all the control, or is it the owners who have all the wealth?